Hello, and welcome to the August 2020 safety meeting. In this meeting, we'll review incidents from July as well as observation card data from July. At the end, you'll be expected to complete HAZCOM training on Wildcat University as well as access to medical records. Let's begin with a look at incidents from the previous month. As of July 31st, 2020, we've gone 306 days without a recordable injury. Our last recordable occurred September 29th, 2019. A look at our incident count year over year shows that in 2018, we had one incident in July, but in 2019, we had 5. In July 2020, we were able to reduce those incidents year over year back down to 1. A summary of our incidents in July 2020 shows that we had 0 recordable injuries. We had 1 injury event. It was a first aid out of Odessa. We had 0 vehicle events. We had 0 property damage events. And we had 0 near hits. Taking a look now at the first aid event out of Odessa, which happened July 13th, 2020, an employee had been working on a reverse unit, putting a manifold together using a sledgehammer. Following the completion of work, the employee noticed a dull pain between their shoulder blades in the middle of their back. The employee reported the pain, but said there were no issues. Later in the week, the employee stated there was still pain and he wished to be seen by a doctor. The employee was seen and released to duty without restriction. Causal factor is body positioning. If you're using a heavy tool, such as a sledgehammer, proper stretching can help eliminate problems. Also, taking periodic breaks to allow your muscles to rest can be critical in keeping yourself healthy. Now let's take a look at observation card information from the previous month. A look at the percentage of observations submitted by each location shows that Odessa has submitted 36% of all observations for Wildcat oil tools, followed next by Pleasanton at 21%. Carlsbad has submitted the third most observations at 19%. All other yards that have submitted observations account for the remaining 24%. Taking a look at the observation card rate for July 2020, which, as a reminder, is the number of observations per employee for a given location. We see 4 locations, Carlsbad, Kiowa, Odessa, and Pleasanton, are on track to hit the quarterly goal of 1.00 observation card rate. This is indicated by the gray line. If your yard is at 0 or their gray line falls below the red line, please increase your observation activity so that your observation card rate will come up. When we compare the number of incidents versus the number of observations over a 12-month rolling period, we see that in July 2020, we had a 15% increase in observations from the previous month of June. During that same time period, our incidents increased by 1. There was also a 63% increase in observations from a year ago, July 2019. Over that same time period, July 2019 to July 2020, we saw an 80% decrease in incidents. Currently, for 2020, we're averaging 34 observations per month. This is a great accomplishment and shows a commitment to this program. When we compare safe versus at-risk observations, we see the majority of our at-risk observations for the month of July came in procedures and standards, tools and equipment, and working conditions. Drilling down a bit into those 3 categories, starting with procedures and standards, we see that 83% of procedure and standard observations had to do with the procedure or standard not being followed. The remaining 17% were not adequate. For tools and equipment, 100% of the observations under that category had to do with the condition of the tool or piece of equipment. And finally, working conditions were comprised of 50% housekeeping, 25% walking surfaces, 13% well control, and 12% working surfaces. We'll look at each of the observations associated with these categories. The first observation for procedures and standards happened when a welder had a 5-inch pipe on stands and accidentally kicked one of the stands, causing the pipe to almost fall. You should always use a crane as a backup to hold the pipe to keep it from falling off the stands should they be bumped. The next observation had to do with a forklift operator driving the forklift with the forks more than 6 inches above the ground. Stop work authority was used in this case, and the forklift operator was told to lower the forks while driving. The next procedures and standard observation happened when a customer wanted to haul a stack to a new pad in one piece. There was no skid available to secure a 16-foot tall stack. Stop work authority was used, and the customer was advised to break the BOP into 2 sections for safer transport. A truck driver, non-Wildcat, was observed chaining a BOP down on location. They were securing the load on the bottom flange of the BOP. Stop work authority was used, and the driver was asked to secure the BOP on top of it by crossing the chains. A snubbing unit operator, non-Wildcat, unchained the snubbing unit before hooking it to the blocks. The snubbing unit fell, struck 2 people, and injured them severely. 1 had to be airlifted. Equipment should always be secure before releasing tie-downs. This is to ensure the equipment does not dislodge or fall. Next, a crew was preparing to work on a pump jack, but it was observed that lockout-tagout was not in place. Stop work authority was used at this time, and the proper locks and tags were put in place. Shifting now to observations having to do with tools and equipment, we begin with an air conditioning unit in the back of the building observed leaking. In this case, the employee that observed it informed the supervisor, and the issue has been addressed. Next, we observed a bubble in the air hose on a compressor. Stop work authority was used, and the hose was replaced. Paint guns were not functioning properly, so the employee took the paint guns apart, cleaned them, and then set up a weekly cleaning schedule to ensure proper maintenance. During a walk through the shop, a grinder was observed without a guard. Stop work authority was used, and the grinder was locked out so it could not be used. A safety meeting was held in the shop for personnel explaining the dangers of operating a grinder without a guard in place. The guard was then replaced on the grinder. Next, several trucks were observed with worn windshield wipers. Stop work authority was used here, and the windshield wipers were replaced. While drilling out cement with a power swivel, the pin that holds the stiff arm on vibrated loose and fell to the floor. Fortunately, there were no personnel on the floor at the time, so nobody was struck by the pin. The pin was then replaced with a cotter pin assembly, and the job finished without incident. Next, while headed to location, a semi-truck had a blowout next to one of our employees, and then started going all over the highway. You should ensure that you check your tire's condition and air pressure prior to driving. Rain started, causing the forks on the forklift to become slick and unsafe. Stop work authority was used, and the facility stopped using the forklift until the rain stopped. After that, they dried the forks prior to beginning use again. Looking now at observations categorized as working conditions, the first says, prior to starting the day, the shop was observed to be disorganized from the day before. The response to this was to clean the shop up and cover housekeeping during their safety meeting. Next, trash was observed around the fence of the yard. The employee that observed this picked up the trash. The wash bay was observed getting full of waste. The supervisor was notified of it and set up a time for the bay to be emptied. The next observation having to do with working conditions happened when extension cords were observed on the shop floor, creating a trip hazard. Stop work authority was used, and the extension cords were removed and properly stored. Next, tools were also observed on the shop floor, not properly stored, which also created a tripping hazard. In this case, stop work authority was used, and the tools were moved to their proper storage location. And finally, large rocks were observed behind the main shop, which could puncture tires and trip people. Stop work authority was used, and the employee submitting the observation cleared the rocks from the area. The last observation we'll review for the month of July happened while running in with a bit and casing scraper. The tubing kicked off and started blowing oil out of the tubing. The floor hands installed the TIW valve and stopped the flow. Next, the floor hands then rigged up the hose to the tubing and circulated oil and gas out of the hole with brine water. As a reminder, you should ensure the TIW valve is in the open position and the closing tool is near it while it's staged on the rig floor, so it can be installed and closed quickly in the event of a loss of well control. Let's finish with a look at the training modules to focus on this month. The focus courses on Wildcat University for this month are Hazard Communication and Access to Medical Records. Again, as a reminder, if your dashboard shows current, do not take these courses again. If your dashboard shows anything other than current, complete the courses above.